Stood Up, Richky Nelson. A 1958 smash for a man far too handsome for my liking. Ever since Dad had given me my guitar and gently coaxed me through the 3 chords of The Prisoner's Song, I had airily assumed those chords were all I'd ever need. I had mastered them and could cover any rock and roll hit from the charts with them. They were second nature to me by now. I knew I was a very basic guitar player, but at least I thought I knew all the basics. Then, in the late spring of 1958, I heard a terrific song that absolutely blew my socks off, but one thing bothered me about it. What's that extra chord? Rock and roll has a 4th chord? I didn't know that. For what it's worth, it was A minor. The song was Poor Little Fool, and it was by Richky Nelson. Richky was a bit of an unusual case. He was the same age as me, but he had been a superstar child actor in the US. From the age of 8, he'd starred in a hugely popular radio and later TV sitcom, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. He had made his first movie when he was just 12. The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet was about Ricky's real-life family. His father and mother, Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, were both well-known actors in America. I suppose the show was a 50s version of The Osbournes, but because the series wasn't shown in Britain, nobody here knew anything about it or about Richky. Off the back of the show, Richky had forged a successful music career in America. Very successful. In fact, some people had called him the first teen idol. Personally, I'm not sure that is true. I think the first teen idol would have been Elvis, or even Frank Sinatra with his Bobby Soxers. And his debut album, Richky, had reached #1 in the Billboard chart in 1957. Not bad for a kid who was still only 17 years old, huh? Richky hadn't had any hits in Britain, but I'd heard a couple of his singles on AFN, A Teenager's Romance and Bebop Baby. I quite liked them, without thinking they were anything out of the ordinary. I could take them or leave them. But then, he put out a song that I liked far more than those. Stood Up. Stood Up was a classic rock and roll song. It had a smart double bass thrum and hand claps which powered it along. And Ricky's voice over his jaunty guitar strum was so cool, controlled, that you could almost hear his top lip curl. It became his first hit in Britain, and I did my bit by buying it as soon as it came out. Despite its jauntiness, Stood Up was another heartbreak song. I've been waiting ever since 8, Richky sighed, as it opened. Guess my baby's got another date. Then he swooped straight into the chorus. Stood up, broken-hearted, again. The simplicity and directness were the song's appeal, along with the fabulous guitar solo. It was definitely the main theme of early rock and roll songs. People falling in love, or falling out of love, or getting dumped and being heartbroken. Those are the main preoccupations of teenagers when they're a mess of hormones. And I guess teenagers loved buying records that sang about how they felt. Those rock and roll songs all had something to say, and yet, personally, although I paid attention to the lyrics, they were never the big thing for me. It was all about the tune and the voice. I never tried to figure out why I liked something. I either liked it or I didn't. And I liked Stood Up very, very much. Norman Mitham and I learned how to play it. I liked how the guitar solo was a melody on its own. We added it to the Drifters' growing repertoire and started playing it at every local gig we did. It didn't take us long to play. In common with every early rock and roll single, Stood Up was short. Very short. It was over in less than 2 minutes. 1 minute and 57 seconds, to be precise. Some hits were even briefer than that. Elvis's Let's Have a Party was less than 1.5 minutes. Because we hadn't seen The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet in Britain, I had no clue what Richky Nelson looked like. When I finally saw a photograph of him, I couldn't believe it. Are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. The guy looked totally amazing. All at once, I understood why he'd become a teen idol in America. Richky had jet black hair and striking blue eyes, like Elvis. It was the combination I'd always craved rather than my own brown hair and hazel eyes. I mean, I didn't think I was too bad looking, but I had quite a round face as a teenager, and here was Richky Nelson with cheekbones sharp enough to strike a match on. Huh. Richky Nelson seemed to have everything: looks, talent, charisma, a great band, but his musical career didn't last. He blew my mind with that A minor chord in Poor Little Fool, and then there were a couple more at the very start of the 60s, Traveling Man, and a cover of a Gene Pitney song, Hello, Mary Lou. But then his songs charted lower and lower. When the famous mid-60s British invasion saw bands such as the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Kinks, and Dave Clark 5 break America, some established U.S. rock and roll artists became seen as old hat and forgotten. Richky Nelson was one of them. I think that was a shame. It seemed like the world had moved on from Richky Nelson, and I probably half forgot about him myself, but he made a comeback in 1972 with a really striking tune called Garden Party. It was a country song, really, with a haunting melody and a lovely chorus, and it got him back in the game in America. It felt good to have Richky back, and when he toured Britain early in 1972, Bruce Welch and I went to see him at the Royal Albert Hall. That was such a strange gig. We went along eager to hear Poor Little Fool, Traveling Man, and most of all, Stood Up, and he just didn't play them. Richky had shortened his name to Rick Nelson by then, formed a band called the Stone Canyon Band, and was playing mellow country rock. It was as if he was embarrassed about his early rock and roll career and had disowned it. They say to give the public what it wants. But Rick, certainly didn't do it that night. He played nearly all new songs, and I wanted to like them, but I'm afraid they just didn't do it for me. Halfway through the show, Bruce leaned over to me and whispered, "Another rock star's career dies." And sorry to say, Bruce was right, as he normally is on these things. Richky Nelson may not have had the long career he merited, but when I came to reinterpret my favorite 50s tunes on the Fabulous Rock and Roll Songbook in 2013, Stood Up was one of the first songs I chose to include. I will always be grateful to Richky for that and for Poor Little Fool, which taught me A minor.